Hello and welcome back to another Read Aloud. I am your lovely host, Miss Disney, and in this reading we are going to be reading Set in Stone, a Twisted Tale novel. This is the Sword in the Stone twisted version, and I hope that you enjoy it. What if Arthur wasn't meant to be king? Having pulled the sword from the stone, scrawny Arthur has gone from washing dishes to sitting on the throne at Camelot Castle. What he doesn't know is that the scheming witch Madame Mim used her magic to help Arthur free the sword, believing the boy would be easy to control once he was made king. When Arthur proves more capable than she imagined, Mim sends her foster daughter Guinevere to put Arthur back in his rightful place washing dishes. But Arthur and Guinevere discover Mim's manipulations and forge an unlikely friendship. As they search for a way to outwit Mim and unite the kingdom, they realize that no one's fate is set in stone. Oh, and it's written by, if I'm mispronouncing it, please correct me, Mancusi. Prologue, Bermuda, present day. Higgins, Pigatus. Alakazam! No, that's not right. That's not right at all. The waiter frowned as he approached the elderly man with the long white beard who had been collapsed on a deck chair in front of the resort's main pool for the past 4 hours, mumbling to himself. He was dressed like an over-enthusiastic tourist, wearing a baseball cap, loud striped shirt, and yellow shorts with little palm trees printed down the sides. On his feet were red Converse trainers, and a pair of yellow sunglasses obscured his eyes. Ugh, why do they always end up in my section? The waiter wondered before clearing his throat. Sir, he tried. Are you all right? The man jerked at the sound of the voice, his baseball cap flying from his head and landing in the pool. He stared up at the waiter, pulling his sunglasses down his hooked nose, revealing a pair of piercing blue eyes that seemed far too sharp for an old man's face. Am I all right? He repeated, as if astounded by the question. Did you just ask me if I'm all right? Yes? The waiter took a small step backwards as the man struggled to get out of his chair, somehow managing to get his foot stuck in the straps in the process. When he tried to yank his foot free, the chair flew backwards, bonking him on the nose. The waiter flinched as the man let out a stream of nonsense words that seemed to be meant as curses, though none the waiter had ever heard before. Oh dear. Maybe he should have left the gentleman well enough alone. Still, he was almost off his shift, and he needed to cash everyone out before he left. Can I get you anything? He ventured. The bill, perhaps? Bill? Please. I don't need a bill. I need a time machine. I don't suppose you have one of those on the menu, do you, my boy? The man ripped off his sunglasses and stared at the waiter, almost accusingly. The waiter sighed, reaching for his mobile phone. It appeared he was going to need some backup on this one. I'm so sorry, sir, he said as he frantically texted hotel security. But I'm afraid we're fresh out of time machines here at the Bermuda Dunes Hotel. Was this man even a guest at the resort? Or had he wandered in from somewhere off the beach? The man groaned loudly and stroked his rather impressive white beard. The waiter found himself wondering just how many years it would take to grow a beard of that magnitude. I'm sorry, the man said. It's just, I'm a bit out of sorts today, you understand? After all, time travel does quite a number on one's noggin, especially if you do it 23 times in a row. Of course it does, the waiter agreed politely. The guests were never wrong. I'm, always saying that to my wife. The man nodded as if this made perfect sense. It wasn't intentional, of course. All I wanted to do was spend a few days in 1960s Bermuda, get a little warmed up after spending all those weeks in a cold, leaky tower. He peered at the waiter. I mean, is that so wrong? The waiter agreed this sounded more than reasonable, but after a short R&R, I was ready to go home, back to medieval England, which should have been a mere hop in the park for an accomplished wizard like myself. But instead, after casting my spell, I find myself still here in Bermuda, this time in the year 2634. He glanced around the resort. A terrible decade, by the way. I don't recommend it at all. He reached into a small suitcase by his feet, pulling out a tall, pointed blue hat. It reminded the waiter of the sorcerer cap a character had worn in an old cartoon, and he wondered, for a second, if the man was going to claim it from the future. Instead, he pointed it on his head. He planted it on his head. So I tried again, and again. At this point, I've bounced around half of human history, but I can't seem to leave this blasted island. He shook his head, nearly losing his cap in the process. I just don't know what's wrong with me. To be fair, the waiter had been wondering the same thing since he'd started the conversation. He tried to surreptitiously glance behind himself. What was taking security so long? The man rose from his chair, shaking crisp crumbs from his beer. You know what? I'll bet it's her doing. He nodded his head vigorously, as if agreeing with himself. She's still mad that I won that duel fair and square, even though she completely cheated. Purple dragon, he rolled his eyes. Of all the ridiculous... The waiter bit his lower lip. You know, sometimes if you spend too long in the sun, and now I'm stuck here, and she's back there, and who knows what she'll try to pull in my absence. What if she goes after the boy again? He'll be completely helpless on his own. His face crumbled. We got in a fight, you see, right before I left. I got mad, and just abandoned him all by himself. Well, with Archimedes, I suppose. He's a very, very intelligent owl. But still, he sighed. Oh, Wart, I never meant to let you down. He looked so despondent, the waiter almost felt bad. Look, I'm sure whoever this Wart is, he'll forgive you, he assured the man, patting him on the shoulder comfortably. In the meantime, maybe you should go take a little nap. I'm sure you'll feel much better if you get out of the sun for a few hours and... The man looked up. Nap? He sputtered, shaking his fist as his long white beard swung from side to side. Haven't you listened to anything I've been saying? I can't take a blasted nap. I need to get back to England pronto. Now, sir, take it easy. The waiter whirled around to see that two burly security guards dressed in matching khaki pants and dark glasses had stepped up behind him. He dropped his soldiers in relief. Back up. Finally. Let's get you back to your room, said the first one, taking a cautious step towards the man. You're going to feel much better soon, assured the second, going around to his other side. I'll take care of your tab, the waiter added, starting to feel a little bad for the old geezer. After all, he was probably someone's grandfather. Maybe this Wart person's, even? What did you say your name was again? My name? The man huffed, suddenly dodging the security guards with a move that seemed far too nimble for an old guy. My name is Merlin, of course. I'm the world's most powerful wizard. He stared up at the sky, moaning mournfully. And if I don't get back to Camelot soon, the world as we know it will surely be doomed. Chapter 1. Arthur. Over 1,000 years earlier, in medieval England. Oh, Archimedes, surely I'm doomed. The young boy Wart, recently crowned King Arthur, paced the cavernous throne room of Camelot Castle, shoving the altogether too heavy velvet and metal crown out of his eyes for what felt like the 1000th time that day. He glanced over at the small brown owl, who perched on the armrest of his new throne. "What am I to do?" Arthur asked mournfully. "I can't be king. I'm 14 years old. Just a boy." A boy who somehow managed to pull the legendary sword from the stone, Archimedes, Merlin's highly educated owl, hooted back in reminder, which evidently makes you the rightful ruler of all England. Arthur gave him a beseeching look, and the owl ruffled his feathers. "Sorry, I don't make the rules." Arthur groaned, dropping down onto the throne, which, by the way, had turned out to be the most uncomfortable chair he'd ever sat on in his entire life. Evidently, kings didn't believe in cushions. "I still don't understand how it happened," he mused, his mind going back to the day a week before when the so-called miracle had taken place. He'd been so excited to stand in as a real squire for the day after Kay's other squire, Hobbs, had mysteriously come down with the mumps. It was a great honor, after all, for a low-born orphan like himself to serve a true knight of the realm, even if in this case, the knight in question was his oafish foster brother, Kay. Arthur had been sure it would be the best day of his life. Instead, it had turned out to be the worst. The jousting tournament had been held to determine who would become England's next king, with the winner taking the throne. England had been too long without a king after Uther Pendragon had died with no heir, and it had thrown the kingdom into a dark age full of war and famine. They badly needed someone to don the crown and start making some rules around the place. And Sir Edgar, Arthur's foster father, had decided his son Kay would be perfect for the job. So, when Arthur accidentally forgot Kay's sword back at the inn, he'd been forced to find another at the last moment, lest Kay be disqualified. And it was Archimedes who had first spotted the lone sword in the nearby churchyard, stuck in an anvil on top of a stone. How was Arthur supposed to know this was the sword in the stone, the one that would truly determine who would be king? It looked like any other sword, until he pulled it out of the anvil. Not long after that, people were bowing to him, knights and lords and ladies who had never given him the time of day, now calling him sire and your majesty and king, claiming it was a miracle ordained by heaven itself, that Arthur was now the land's chosen monarch. That Arthur, single-handedly, would somehow save them all. "Why me?" he asked, staring up at the high ceiling of the throne room, which was decorated in rich tapestries of royal blues and purples and greens. "I'm no one. I wash dishes for a living. I shouldn't be king." "Don't think I don't agree with you," Archimedes assured him with a dismissive snort. "I told Merlin from the start he was wasting his time with you, but he saw something in you." The owl spun his head. "Maybe this was it." "I wish he had warned me," Arthur grumped, thinking back to his kind but somewhat bumbling tutor. The wizard Merlin had seen fit to take Arthur under his wing the year before, after Arthur had accidentally crashed through his roof, searching for Kay's lost arrow. At the time, Arthur had just been grateful for the attention, even if Merlin's unique brand of tutelage did frequently get him into a bit of trouble. After all, who wouldn't enjoy lessons that entailed becoming a fish, or a squirrel, or even a bird? But those transformations hadn't exactly prepared him for being a king. "If only Merlin would come back," he moaned. "He'd know what to do." Archimedes flew from the throne up to a wooden beam near the ceiling. "Believe me, I want Merlin back as much as you do," he agreed. "I never realized how fond I was of the old fool until he bopped himself up to Bermuda." "Blow me to Bermuda," Arthur sadly echoed Merlin's last words. "I know he was angry with me, but I never thought he'd stay away for good." He slumped his shoulders. "I should have turned down the squire job like he wanted me to. I could have stayed behind at Edgar's castle and continued my lessons with him. Then I wouldn't be in such a mess. If only there were a way to reach him, to apologize. Merlin had been right about everything all along, but Arthur hadn't listened. "Well, there's no use crying over wandering wizards," Archimedes chirped. "The point is, he's gone. You're king, and there's nothing you can do about it. So I suggest you stop moping about and start doing your duty." He flew across the throne room to the double doors at the end. "There are at least 24 people outside waiting to talk to you. You can't keep them out forever." Arthur nodded miserably. He knew the owl was right. "Very well," he said. "Let them in." He tried to straighten his crown, which was far too big for his head, and sat up taller in his throne. Archimedes waited for him to be settled, then yanked the front doors open with his talons. Suddenly, the vast empty chamber exploded in sound and color as the people of England poured its inside to meet their new king. Arthur tried not to squirm as they dropped to their knees before him and practically kissed the ground at his feet. How embarrassing. "All rise," he called out, trying to make his voice sound authoritative, like a king's. Instead, it sounded as squeaky as a mouse's. "Make an orderly line. I'm ready to hear your grievances." Arthur had never known any actual kings prior to becoming one himself, mind you, but he had always just assumed being king meant being able to do whatever you wanted, whenever you wanted to do it. Unfortunately, the opposite was true according to Sir Pellinore, who had instated himself as head knight and official advisor once Arthur took the throne. A king had to attend to his subjects constantly, listening to their problems and trying to help solve them, even if their problems were difficult or just plain ridiculous. Speaking of, an apple-cheeked woman with pale skin and freckles, dressed in a dusty white apron and powder blue dress, pushed her way through the crowd, cradling a small brown chicken in her arms. "Your Majesty," she said, bowing so low to Arthur that she almost dropped her chicken in the process. "I am in desperate need of your help." Arthur nodded, beckoning for her to stand upright again. He wondered, not for the first time, if it was within his power to outlaw bowing entirely, at least to a king. He'd have to ask Sir Bellinor later. "What seems to be the trouble?" he asked. The woman thrust the bird forwards. "I am Mistress Mabel, and this is my chicken. I call her Helen of Troy. She's a remarkable bird, always has an egg for me every morning, rain or shine." "That's great." Arthur waited for the complaint. "Well, this morning I went out to her hen house and there was no egg, and no Helen of Troy either. I searched the yard thoroughly, concerned that a fox may have come in and stolen her away in the night." "But you found her," Arthur suggested gently, gesturing to the chicken, which was clearly no longer lost nor eaten by a fox. "She's all right." He wondered if it'd be unkingly to ask her to get to the point. "I found her in my neighbor's chicken coop," Mistress Mabel sputtered, her red cheeks ripe with indignation. Before Arthur could speak, another woman shoved her way through the crowd. She grabbed the chicken from Mabel and yanked it in her own direction. Helen of Troy squawked in dismay. and a spray of feathers burst into the air, causing several people, including Arthur, to sneeze. "Bless you," Archimedes whispered, "and good luck with this one." Arthur sighed and turned back to the new woman in front of him. "I'm sorry. You are—" "I'm Ain, the rightful owner of this here chicken," the new woman declared. "I see." "Oh dear." Arthur's eyes strayed to the long line of people behind the two women, who were starting to look impatient. Mistress Ain puffed out her chest. "You see, sire, I woke up this morning, ready to get started preparing our family's daily meal. We were all looking forward to a nice supper of roasted bird this eve." She licked her lips. Helena Troy squirmed in her arms, looking a tad alarmed. "So I go out to the chicken coop, and what do I find there but this thief?" She gestured angrily to Mistress Mabel at her left. "She was trying to steal my chicken, steal food out of my poor sweet kids' very mouths." "Helen of Troy is mine," Mistress Mabel protested. "I hatched her from an egg. A disgusting lie. I picked her up at the market on Monday," countered Mistress Ain, crossing her arms over her chest. "And you can't prove that I didn't." The two women turned to look at Arthur expectantly. Meanwhile, the chicken had managed to wrinkle its way out of Ain's hands and drop to the floor, which it pecked at. Arthur raked a hand through his hair, feeling nervous. He knew they wanted him to rule on whom the chicken truly belonged to. But how could he tell for sure? They both seemed utterly convinced the bird was theirs. If only Merlin were there, he'd know what to do. Arthur turned to Archimedes, who was the next best thing. "What should I do?" he whispered. The owl ruffled his feathers. "I'm sure I don't know. Though chicken for dinner does sound quite lovely," he eyed the bird hungrily. "Maybe we should just take it for ourselves and settle it that way." "But that wouldn't be fair," Archimedes protested. "You want fair? Then just let them split it in two," Archimedes replied. "One half for each of them. That would be fair, right?" He huffed. "And then we can move on from all this nonsense and get to the important matters of the day." Arthur frowned. The owl wasn't wrong. But still, something about it didn't seem right with him. His eyes traveled to the two women. Mistress Ain was glaring at Mistress Mabel with a smug look on her face. Mistress Mabel looked close to tears. And suddenly, he had an idea. "Very well," he declared grandly, addressing the women and the court. "Since I suppose we can't know for sure who the bird belongs to, how about this? What if we cut the chicken in half, and you can each have half of it? That ought to solve your problem, right?" He watched the two women's faces, holding his breath. Ain spoke first. "Half," she muttered. "Well, I suppose it's better than nothing, though with my big family—" She trailed off, turning to Mistress Mabel, who Arthur realized had burst into tears. Arthur watched as she dropped to her knees in front of him, her hands clasped in prayer. "Please, kind sir," she begged, "your grace, your majesty, do not split Helen of Troy in two. If she must have her, then she must have her. But make her promise not to eat her and to let her lay her daily eggs. They're good eggs, the best in the village." She turned to Ain, her face pleading. "You do so much better to keep her alive than eat her. I promise you." It was all Arthur needed to hear. He clapped his hands. "I have made my decision," he declared. "The chicken, Helen of Troy, shall be returned to this woman here." He smiled down at Mabel, who was still on her knees before him. For if she cares so much for the fate of a chicken that she's willing to give it away rather than have it be cut in two, clearly she is the rightful owner. Mabel let out a cry of joy. She dived for the chicken. Helen of Troy leapt into her lap and she hugged the creature tightly against her chest, tears streaming down her rosy cheeks. The crowd behind her broke into cheers. Mistress Anne grunted and stormed out of the great hall, slamming the door behind her. "Oh, thank you, kind sir," Mabel cried, still weeping. "Finally, we have a true king, one who is so just and good and kind and fair." She rose to her feet, still cuddling Helen of Troy. "I will bring you eggs every day from now on, to thank you for your kindness." She bowed again, then turned and headed through the hall to the door, all the while being congratulated by the others waiting their turns. "That was very good, boy," Archimedes hooted. "Using wisdom to gain knowledge. Merlin would be so proud." Arthur beamed, all of a sudden feeling quite proud of himself. His first act as king, and it was a success. Perhaps this wouldn't be as hard as he thought. "Your Majesty, if you're done courting chickens, we must speak of graver matters." Or maybe not. Arthur looked up to see that Sir Pellinore had stepped up to the throne. The tall, thin, balding knight looked quite distraught, with an expression under his thick gray mustache that sent a chill down Arthur's spine. "What is it?" Arthur asked worriedly, not entirely sure he wanted to know. Sir Pellinore gave him a solemn look. "We have word that a new threat is coming to London town, Your Majesty. An army of Saxon invaders is rumored to be landing on our eastern shores. They have supposedly heard of your new position and likely seek to learn for themselves what metal you are made of." He met Arthur's eyes with his own steely gray ones. "What should we do to answer their call?" Arthur sank back into his seat, all his earlier bravado fleeing. While the fate of chickens was something he felt somewhat confident handling, the fate of the kingdom was something else entirely, especially when it came to matters of war. What if he made the wrong decision? People could die. England could be overrun by invaders. Soon there might not even be an England for him to be king of. He glanced over at Archimedes, but the owl had retreated up into the rafters. "Coward." He stammered, turning back to Pellinore. "What do you think we should do?" Pellinore was, after all, an actual knight, and much more versed in these types of matters. But the elderly knight shook his head. "What I think doesn't matter in this case," he told Arthur. "You, my boy, are our king. You are the one with heaven's chose. You are the one who must decide our fate." Arthur bit back a groan. He had a feeling Pellinore was going to say something like that. He rubbed his hand on his chin, as if deep in thought. But in truth, his mind was basically blank. He squirmed on his throne, once again wishing he had a cushion. But all the cushions in the world couldn't get him out of this one. What would Merlin do? He asked himself again. But this time he had no answer. Merlin had tried to give him a top-notch education, but none of his teachings had to do with battles or invaders. War wasn't the wizard's thing. "Well, Your Majesty?" Arthur could feel the entire court locking their eyes onto him, holding their breaths, waiting for his reply. Whatever came out of his mouth next had the potential to change the course of history. He did not want to say the wrong thing. He swallowed hard and opened his mouth. I think we should. His voice trailed off as he realized everything had gone strangely quiet. The hum of voices in the hall had completely ceased, and when his eyes scanned the room, he realized everyone was standing very still. Not still because they were paying close attention, mind you, but as if they had actually been frozen in time, or in place. Even Archimedes was hanging above him, suspended in mid-air. Then suddenly, a new voice rose up beside Arthur, thin and reedy and high-pitched. Now, don't tell me our illustrious new king is chicken.